A very good morning to you. Travel and Things in association with Sun Destinations, iconic destinations with amazing experience, present In Conversation With. And today, my guest is Allan Sinclair, who is the director of the Ditsong Museum of Military History. Allan, good morning and welcome to you.
Morning, David. Thank you for having me.
It's only a pleasure. It has been a long while since you and I chatted. This
Yes.
memorial is probably well known to Johannesburgers and who drive past it probably on a daily basis. What is it and where can it be found?
All right. Well, first of all, that is the National Anglo-Boer War Memorial,
Right.
or in its previous guard, the Rand Regiment's Memorial.
Okay.
Um, Incidentally enough, it does not form part of the museum.
Oh,
It's a standalone object that belongs to the people of the city of Johannesburg,
okay.
and it was donated by the landlords to the city following the end of the Boer War,
Mhm.
unveiled in well, the foundation stone was unveiled in 1910.
Right.
So that's almost 40 years before the museum came about.
Okay.
And its original focus was to commemorate the men of the Rand who fought for the British Empire during the
Mhm.
war. However, it's since been rededicated as the National Anglo-Boer War Memorial, and it commemorates, all those from both sides who fought in the Boer War.
I wonder how the original did the original group who gave this to the city feel about that. You know, they were obviously very specific in what it would commemorate, and now all of a sudden everybody's involved.
Well, yeah, it's interesting enough that the Johannesburg City Council wanted it, and the Transvaal government at the time, which was headed by Louis Botha and Jan Smuts. They wanted it to be an all-inclusive
Ah,
memorial,
okay. All right.
but the landlords didn't feel that way, and as such, the memorial has always sort of fell into abeyance
Hmm.
and not really been looked after. So when back in the 80s, new trustees were formed to look after the memorial, of which I am one.
Hmm.
And a decision was taken, and it was around the time of the centenary of the war, to make it an all-inclusive
Ah, okay.
memorial. And that was all part of transformation and nation building that went on at the time.
All right. So let's move from the outside to the in, and this is a plaque that I stumbled across, and it doesn't really, I don't want to say it doesn't make sense. But once you've been through the museum, when you see it on your way out, all of a sudden it takes on a whole different connotation.
Mm. Okay, this forms part of the remembrance prayer that one hears on the 11th of November every year. Unfortunately, this is the paratrooper memorial that has been put up at the
Yeah.
museum. It is one of many memorials that we have in the museum. And the full saying should be, when you go home, tell them of us and save, that for your tomorrow we gave our today. Our gift was great, but now you must give a greater gift. We died, so you must nobly live and complete the plan to make man brother unto man. So that is the full
Uh,
text
right.
of the remembrance prayer.
Well, it's a bit too much for a small plaque at at the start of your meander
Yes.
through the
Yeah.
museum. What
Mm.
is the sort of reaction that you get from guests or from visitors to the museum? How do they view what they're seeing? Do they have any idea of what went on and what the troops experienced in and on the machinery that you display?
I think you get two types of people, Dave. You get those who do and you get those who don't.
Mm,
And that's one of the reasons we are there, is to educate people on just what South Africans have done in the past.
mm.
So that's one of the things. The second is to show that war is not a good thing.
No,
It's a
definitely
very
not.
bad thing. And the third is to show the technology that was created. So generally, you get those, and they're very much in the minority, I think, who
Mm,
know what happened, who know where South Africans fought, who know about the First and Second World Wars, and then you get those that really don't. And we always refer to the museum as the greatest state secret because unfortunately we don't have the funding for marketing,
mm.
and the people that come there are quite impressed, I must be honest. And, they say this is sort of a treasure that is hidden away. So thanks to people like yourself, we're trying to solve that problem.
You're right.
But generally, people are in awe at what we have there and the way we are attempting to preserve this part of our history.
I've been to the museum several times now, some before you and I first met, and subsequently. And there is an overall feeling of, on my last visit, I specifically didn't want to focus on the large. I wanted to focus on like a seat or a brass plate that somebody may have held or stood on to focus attention on the people who are on the vehicles or on the guns and that type
Mm.
of thing. And I think that's often forgotten about because you see a tank and you go, whoa, it's a tank. I better have a look at this type of thing.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. People had to use these machines. They had to
Mm,
drive them. Many people, unfortunately, died in such vehicles. Um, yeah, it's all part of the military history, and that's in a sense is why the museum is also a memorial to those who fought and ultimately paid the supreme sacrifice, as
yeah.
well as those who returned. So that's very much what the museum story is to remember the human element of warfare.
Do you ever find sort of you wandering around the museum and you find an old man sitting on a bench, maybe quietly crying because he's recognized a machine that maybe he was part of?
I don't think I've ever seen anybody crying, but
Right.
I've seen people who say, yes, yes, that was me. I was in there. I used that, or I flew that aircraft. I remember a gentleman years ago who flew in the Mosquito aircraft in the
Mm,
same squadron as the Mosquito we have.
right.
And he just stood there and told us endless stories about it.
Wow.
Mm,
Unfortunately, when I was there, there was a film shoot going on, a fashion shoot.
mm,
And the
mm.
young man modeling, I thought, I wonder if you have any idea of what you're standing next to, other than the fact that it's big and it's painted in a very drab color.
There are those who do ask these questions,
Hmm.
yes.
Now,
Unfortunately,
yeah,
many sorry, David, I beg your pardon.
no.
I was going
Unfortunately,
to I was going to say the bulk, and I think 99% of those who fought in the Second World War are now gone.
yeah.
So you will never get that sort of person there.
Hmm.
But then the next generation are around now, and sadly getting on in years as well, such as
This is
myself.
count me in on that one as well, Alan. The upkeep, you were saying you don't have a big budget. So the upkeep of this museum and especially the exhibits must be incredibly difficult because paint flakes, rust appears where you least expect it. And because you've got a stream of visitors coming in and out, you have to keep things in tip-top condition. Unlike this windscreen, which I don't think you're damaged, but this windscreen told me a story. I mean, can you imagine sitting behind that with machine gun bullets being sprayed at you?
Absolutely, and that was specifically designed to protect the person, inside there. You're right, Dave. It is a lot of work, and we have a restoration program that we keep up with on an annual basis. So every year we'll choose certain exhibits,
Right.
and we will restore those exhibits.
Mm.
Not to running order, we don't do that, but just to make sure that all the rust comes off and it's given a new coat of paint. We are lucky in that we have a large amount of stakeholders
Mm.
that support the museum, especially the military veterans. And the museum has what's called the Building and Development Trust, which is a separate fund run by veterans, not necessarily all veterans. And the purpose of that trust is to assist the museum in whatever way possible. And,
Right.
and quite a bit of that goes towards the upkeep of exhibits.
Now, this, I believe, has recently been restored.
Yes, and luckily enough, we received a sponsorship from a company to assist us with this exhibit.
Right.
So yeah, unfortunately, this is the Dakota, the C-47 Dakota, and as you
Mm.
can see in the photograph, it is not undercover, so it is not protected from the elements, and
Yeah.
and especially the sun, which eats away at that aircraft. So we have to, I think, on a 4 yearly basis, uh, restore, repaint that
Mm.
aircraft.
What is the history behind this particular plane?
This is an interesting exhibit. After it was designed and built, it was used by the Royal Air Force in the Far East, and particularly to fly supplies from India over the hump, they called it, which is the Himalayas, and into China. So to supply the Chinese forces that were fighting against the Japanese during the war.
Right.
And after the war, it sort of went around the world and somehow from Sudan ended up in South Africa in the 1970s, where it was taken on board by the South African Air Force and used, I think, towards the end of the 1980s. And eventually it ended up at Empress Palace, where it was used as a internet cafe. And after there was they redid Empress Palace. It
Mm.
was eventually donated to us, which we were very happy about.
And for people who don't know, Emperor's Palace is a casino here on the outskirts
Mm.
of Johannesburg near OR Tambo International Airport. Not the place that you want to end up if you're a military veteran like this one.
Yes, yes. Mm.
Now, I found an interesting connection to my family. I was walking past that aircraft, in fact, on the undercover part of it, or close by, when I came across this plaque, which is dedicated to the Jewish soldiers that fell
Mm.
during the Second World War. And lo and behold, there is P.O.H. Batsoffen on this plaque. Now, I did not know who H. Batsoffen was. So I had to reach out to family members in Israel to find out it was the brother of this particular family member's father. And he was a pilot officer who was shot down and killed over the desert during the Second World War, which was quite interesting for me.
You could probably also find, if you go to the Commonwealth War Graves website, you may find reference to this Batshoffen there as well.
His name was
If
Jaime, I
if he
discovered.
sorry, I beg your
His
pardon?
name was Jaime, as I was to
Jaime.
discover.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is he South African?
Yes, he was.
Was he South African?
Yeah.
But if he fought in the Royal Air Force, then you see one can get the service records. And if he was through the what do they call themselves now? The National Archives in the UK,
Now
you
you
would
can find out
be
more
able to
about
find
him.
out about him
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
And I also looked up, is this Bob? What was his name here?
Criminal.
Crinnell. I
Yeah.
looked him up and
Mm.
he's also got an interesting history.
Mm. And funnily enough, I came across a gentleman over the long weekend
Right.
who knew him very well. So, you always there's always these stories that come around. So,
It
yes, he was a pilot in the South African Air Force who
right.
flew that exact aircraft in operations, on the border
Mm.
in Angola, northern Southwest Africa at the time.
And now there it stands proudly together with a whole lot of other airplanes. And these are luckily undercover.
They are to a certain extent, but they're,
Mm.
they're also very much still open to the elements.
Yeah.
But yeah, being undercover, they do get a lot more protection. But then the covers themselves have to be
You
preserved,
have to be
which
preserved.
creates extra problems as well.
Took this picture because these are what to me are viewports on a tank of some description. And I
Hmm.
thought, imagine
Yeah.
fighting a war where you can only see in front of you and you have a very limited field of vision. I mean, if somebody climbs up the tank from behind you, you have no idea what's going on. And it must have been
Well,
terrifying for the men inside.
it wasn't pleasant, believe me. And when a tank got hit, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Fury
No.
about the American tanks in the Second World War.
Mm.
When a tank got hit, it wasn't pleasant in there because obviously you've got fuel and ammunition inside, and the two don't
Right.
go together when
No.
fire is concerned.
Mm.
But you would have had a tank crew. So the driver, yes, he would be looking through um, what was it called? They used them in the trenches in the First World War, where you would look over
Like a
the
periscope.
periscope. That's what I'm thinking. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, they would be viewed through periscopes. And yes, his job was to go forward, but you would have had a tank commander, a loader, and a gunner, for instance, who would also be part of it, and they would know what was going on around the tank.
You're right. But again, as
Mm.
you say, not very pleasant inside, very cramped. And of course, you're trapped. People think, oh, well, it's thick steel. If a shell hits us, nothing will happen. Well, when shell hits you, you have nowhere to run. That's the first
You
thing.
don't.
And as you
Yeah.
say, flammable
Mm.
and explosives do not mix. Alan, aside from
Mm.
the exterior exhibits, you have interior halls, which are very difficult to photograph in because the lighting is very subdued and it's not designed for photo shoots. It's designed, I should imagine,
Mm.
partly to protect what's being kept in there. You don't want it to be under bright, almost sterile lighting. So, what do you
No,
keep
and
in
to
there?
create sort of an atmosphere as
An
well.
ambience. And
Yeah.
also, just
Mm.
before we get onto that, the one regiment I see that you almost give its own section to is 32 Battalion.
Mm. Yes, we've got a few of those exhibits, and that's
Mm,
partly because of our association with the veterans of these units.
right.
61 mechanized battalion group also have their own section,
Mm,
and they maintain those exhibits. And we are in the process of building a new room called the regiment's room, and it's all the old citizen force units that no longer have their own headquarters, and we're
okay.
looking for a place to stay. And that has been given to them to display all their wares as well.
Mm,
So you've got units such as the Transvaal Scottish, the Witwatersrand Rifles, the Transvaal Horse Artillery, the South African Irish. We've even got the Cape Corps, the Johannesburg Regiment. They're all creating their own exhibit areas in this new regiment's room, which is to be
okay.
opened on the 24th of May this year.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's
Okay.
part of the community involvement in the museum, if I may say, in
Mm.
that the community actually becomes part of the museum and takes an active role in the exhibits that we have at inside.
Now, those exhibits, do they also get updated from time to time, or are those static? And once, there are 12 rifles in a case and they've been lit, the 12 rifles stay there? Or is there a storeroom somewhere on the property that every now and again you think, "Ah, let's pull out some new stuff and just change the display from time to time.
Look, yes, what you see on display in the museum is about, I would say, 20% of what we have. And that's
Really?
apart from the large hardware like the tanks, armored cars, aircraft.
Mm.
Obviously, we don't have storerooms for those, but all the other stuff that we have storerooms, and they are full of exhibits. And well, look, it's not always easy to change an exhibit. It does cost money and it does take time. So we wouldn't be changing weapons on an annual basis. So no, the exhibits that we put up tend to have quite a long life. But then we do, then we look at certain projects every year. So
Mm.
we may change one exhibit this year and then look at another one next year, kind of thing.
Now, this fascinated me. This particular vehicle, they've stripped all the gauges out of. There's one gauge, I think, which may be petrol. But I suppose nothing else meant anything. You don't need to know how fast you're going. You don't need sat nav on these. In those days, I don't think there was. But it's stripped down to
Now, I think,
the bare minimum.
yeah, no, but this would probably be after the war, Dave. That these things
Oh, okay.
were stripped. They would have had all these gauges and that when it was
Oh,
operational.
oh, all
Mm,
right. I thought they would have stripped
yeah.
them because they were unnecessary and maybe cast a glow on the
No, no, no,
driver's
they were
face.
very necessary. Yeah.
I suppose things like oil
Mm.
pressure do matter.
The thing is, after the war, there was a lot of people that wanted souvenirs.
Mm.
So there was a lot of pilfering that went on with such things, such
Ah,
items, until such time as they got inside a museum where they could be protected.
well, I'm good. It's good to know that. Now,
Mm.
this to me is a reason for having interspecies relationships. This plane to me is singularly the most beautiful piece of machinery I have ever seen. I have stood before it in on many occasions. And the word lust springs to mind, which is wrong in this instance. Tell us the history
Mm.
of this particular Messerschmitt and why is it so special?
This
Surely I'm
this
not the
is
only one. Let me put a caveat to that before you answer, Alan. Surely I'm not
mm.
the only one who has feelings for this plane.
No, definitely not. Let's put this in context. If this was the Louvre, if our museum was the Louvre in Paris,
Right.
this is the Mona Lisa.
Ah,
Because this
okay.
is the Messerschmitt Me 262 two-seater night fighter, the first jet aircraft ever used in action. And this example is the only one of its type in the world, the two-seater night fighter.
Right.
If you look on the front, you'll see the antennae, and
Mm,
that was a very rudimentary radar system that they developed at the time. So this aircraft was used, okay, as I said, the first jet aircraft used in action.
mm,
It was used in the defense of Berlin at the end of the war. It was then moved up to Schleswig in Denmark, where it was eventually captured by the Royal Air Force. So it was taken back to the UK, where it was used. They undertook tests on it because the British wanted to know what made this aircraft tick.
mm,
And eventually, it came to South Africa through an Air Force pilot called Captain Jack Meeker, who was on course in the UK in 1946. It was a course of Commonwealth pilots, and they were taken around. There were fields of these captured equipment in the UK,
mm,
and they were told, put your names on that, and we'll ship them out to your countries. So he put his name on this aircraft and a number of other aircraft. And months later, when he was back in his office in Pretoria, he got a call from his commanding officer saying that his aircraft had arrived in Cape Town and he had to pay duty for whatever it was at the time. Um, you know,
right.
and he had a slight heart attack about that and explained the whole story. And eventually, the South African Treasury agreed to pay the duty, and the aircraft were taken in by the South African Air Force. And they were kept at the airbase in Donata, just outside Springs,
Mm.
until about 1975 when they were donated to our museum.
Now, I
But this
believe this.
aircraft, it is special. It's the only one of its kind in the world, as I've said.
Mm.
The camouflage that you see there is because these aircraft were flown off the autobahns in Germany, and they were parked under the trees while not in use. So, you can imagine flying over, you'd see this dappled, the trees and that,
Yeah,
it would be hidden in the trees there.
I'm amazed,
So
Alan.
it has a very interesting history.
It is
People
indeed.
think that those are bombs under the fuselage, but they are jettison tanks, fuel tanks. Because it was used as a two-seater, they had to remove one of the fuel tanks that was
Ah,
aft of the pilot,
right.
and so they used these tanks, these outside tanks, for the aircraft to take off, and then those tanks would be dropped while in flight.
Now, I believe that this aircraft, while the Brits were sort of reverse engineering it, was crashed and has been repaired. I only found this out after I left the museum. Otherwise, I would have looked for the rivets that were
Mm,
mentioned in the article. So
yeah.
it's not
Mm.
flyable, and that's not the
No.
object of your museum. Is not to put it back
Well,
to
no.
flying condition, but it's in a condition that it would have been if it was on the ground during the Second World War.
Yeah, no, it would take a lot of work to get this aircraft operation. And believe me, we've been offered billions by overseas enthusiasts for this aircraft.
Right.
But we feel that this aircraft is there where it belongs,
Mhm.
and we look after it for posterity. Mm.
Well, at least you've moved it indoors. It used to be outdoors undercover, and I think somebody
Yeah,
realized that this is special
mm,
enough to warrant a corner on the interior of the museum. And then the
absolutely.
museum, how do people find out about you? You say you're one of the best kept secrets in Johannesburg. So how do they
Mm.
find out about you? What are your opening hours, that type of thing?
Okay, yes, we've part of the Ditsong Museums of South Africa,
Right.
which is all the national museums in this province that were formed under one umbrella in 2000. And so we are one of 10 museums under the Ditsong group.
Mhm.
So you can go to www.ditsong.org.za and you will find out all about the museum. We're open every day of the week except for Good Friday and Christmas Day,
Right.
from 9 till 4. So Saturdays and Sundays and during the
Okay.
week. And we are at the top end of the Johannesburg Zoo. So if you know where the Joburg Zoo is, you follow the road around the zoo where you'll see the memorial that we spoke about at the
Yeah.
start,
You
and the
can't miss
museum is
that.
right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Alan, thank you so very much for joining me this morning. It's always nice to talk to you. I do like your museum. And maybe
Thank you,
once
David.
the new regiment hall is up and running, I'll come back to do an addendum to the last article I wrote for you guys. My guest today on In Conversation With has been Allan Sinclair, who's the director of the Ditsong Museum of Military History. Alan, once again, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, David, and goodbye.
Cheers. Alan joining us from the museum. My name is David Batsoff, and until the next time, thanks for joining me.